Now, Lucy Letby was given 2 whole life orders after being convicted of killing 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 more while she worked as a nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital. But her attempts to have her convictions overturned have gained pace since she appointed a new lawyer. Mark McDonald brought together an independent panel of neonatal and paediatric experts who cast some doubt on the evidence at her trial and gave him new evidence to submit to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. That body is the body that assesses if there has been a miscarriage of justice. Well, some of that evidence went to the CCRC on Friday, and now we wait. I'm pleased to say that her lawyer, Mark McDonald, is with us now. Good morning to you.
Morning.
This is an incredibly complicated case, which is very difficult for people who weren't sitting there through the trial to understand. So can you outline for us briefly and clearly why you believe that Lucy Letby is innocent of the crimes she's been convicted for?
All right. So the whole case was premised on a hypothetical. So there's no direct evidence, no CCTV, no one saw Lucy do anything wrong. Everything was done in hindsight. At the time, the babies that died or whose health deteriorated was seen to be a normal action or a natural causes. So post-mortems never identified any issue. So it was all done in hindsight, i.e. looking back, looking at medical records. And an expert or 2 or 3 experts looked at these notes and came to a view that something had gone wrong, that it was malicious acts. And so you had a theory that sort of grew. And that's what Lucy Letby was convicted of, a hypothetical, a theory, an educated guess. And the issue here is the competency of the expert evidence that was presented to the jury, which is why there's now an international body that was put together of the leading experts in this area, neonatology, from across the world that have looked at everything and simply said no crime was committed.
What's interesting about this case is, and I mean, we can go into all of the details of this. You talk about Dr. Dewey Evans' evidence, which he's a retired consultant paediatrician, and he was talking about skin discolorations. I know some people have concerns about that, but he's come out and said, well, I wasn't based completely on the skin discolorations. It was one item that I looked at on an air embolism checklist. So you're absolutely right. There was no direct evidence that people witnessed Lucy Letby killing these babies. But one thing that has always stayed with me since an interview I did with a local radio journalist soon after her conviction. She was one of the few people who sat through every day of that trial. And her and the other people that I've spoken to who have been there have said for people to come in and take out certain bits of the case, they could legitimately question it. But she sat there every day through the trial. And generally, as far as she's aware, the people that did sit through that every single day and heard all of the evidence are convinced of her guilt. You weren't at that trial, were you?
No. But what happened, because this trial was a 10-month, you had live notes, transcripts of every single piece of evidence that was given in that trial. I've got access to hundreds of thousands of transcripts, as well as the statements, as well as the reports that were prepared, as well as the interviews that was done. So I've got thousands upon thousands of documents, which I've been reading and read over the last 12 months. And the expert panel that have come up with the reports that they've looked at these transcripts and they've looked at the evidence. But you know what's really crucial here is that before the trial started, Dr. Dewey Evans prepared reports. He didn't prepare reports on a trial because the trial hasn't happened. Those reports are what was repeated before the jury. It wasn't, except for a couple of times when he came up, certainly on one occasion, he came up with on the spur of the moment, took everybody by the surprise of how he said a baby had died. Mainly, 99%, everybody knew what he was going to say before he got in the witness box. So those reports have been seen by the new expert panel, along with the transcripts of the evidence, along with the way that judges summed up, along with the opening and closing speech. And one of the concerns here, and I think I know the local journalist that you're speaking about, is this view that she just didn't look right, or she didn't come across very well, or she didn't smile, or the tears didn't happen straight away. They happened later.
I mean, to be fair, in defence of this local radio reporter, this local newspaper reporter, that's not what she said. She said she listened to the evidence. It wasn't about how Lucy Letby responded.
Well, okay. Look, I don't know because I didn't listen to her. I didn't see her. Don't know who you're talking about. It's someone who chatted to, but I have heard
on national radio. But yes,
I have heard local journalists say, particularly on the BBC. Particularly, I mean, they've gone around, they've written a book about it, in fact, and they've gone around presenting their book in shows like Loose Women, saying, oh, she just didn't look right. And
I guess
really
one of the problems with that, Mark, is, and if we're going to talk about Lucy Letby's behaviour at the trial, let's do that, because she spent 14 days being questioned, and several observers noted that she sort of tied herself in knots. She said she couldn't remember things like the death of a baby that she'd texted colleagues about. And she doesn't remember, or she said at the trial, she didn't remember repeatedly searching for the parents of dead babies online. I mean, how do you explain that?
I mean, the way that you're even asking that question, sort of incredulity about it, saying in effect,
I think I'd remember if I texted people about babies that had died and I'd searched online. Most people would. No, do by all means. I know, but you were asking me, so I was just explaining.
Let me ask the question, all right? Now, first of all, these were all done years later, all right? When things have passed on the unit, when things have moved on, there are many, many babies that come into that unit that go out of that unit. She was cross-examined rigorously, robustly for 2 whole weeks. Actually, she was in the witness box for 3 weeks. So each day she was in prison. She got up at 6 a.m. She spent an hour and a half on effectively a prison van. Then she waited downstairs for an hour. Then she came up, she went into the witness box day after day after day. And every time she gave an explanation, every time that didn't come right, it was used against her. The way that she was cross-examined. But not only that, and that's the nature of our advocacy system in this country, but not only that, we know, and the court knew, that she was in a vulnerable position because of the nature of the charges. She'd been in custody for 2 years waiting for this trial to happen. We knew that she was in a vulnerable position. The prosecution knew she was in a vulnerable position. The defense knew that she was a vulnerable person. And they kept on asking her questions. Now,
they have to ask her questions, though, don't they, in a trial?
Your specific issue in relation to Facebook searches. These are searches on Facebooks about families and babies that she had dealt with. It wasn't just that one. There actually many nurses and people who have worked in hospital that have searched for patients that they've looked after to see how they're doing. And actually, by far, a majority of the searches that and you didn't hear from any other nurse about the Facebook searches they were doing, by far a majority of the searches were for babies that were not harmed at all. So the cherry picking that went on about this baby or that baby, but not about any of the other babies.
Can I just ask you,
or discussed.
The public inquiry? No. Yeah. Of course I know, and we could talk for hours about this, couldn't we?
Yes,
a public inquiry led by Lady Justice Thirlwell, which was obviously investigating the Countess of Chester Hospital's responses to the death. She's been highly critical of the people who've cast doubt on the verdicts. She says it causes, quote, enormous additional distress to the parents.
You said that on day one.
Yeah. Do you accept that? Do you understand what it's like for those?
September last year.
Yeah.
Since that time, every major editorial of a newspaper has come out and said this matter needs to go back to the Court of Appeal. The Telegraph, the Sunday Mail, the Times.
Okay, I guess I'm asking about the parents and how distressing. I'm asking.
Very, very vocal.
Sure, Mark. Sorry, Mark. I'm just asking about the parents. Are you able to empathise with the parents that all of this must be incredibly harrowing? Well, that's the question I asked you.
The different question you asked about Lady Justice Thirlwell.
No, I gave you the quote and I said, do you understand that they might be upset?
We're talking over each other, so no one can understand what we're saying. So let me just finish the answer to your question. Right at the start, at the Thirlwell inquiry, Lady Justice Thirlwell did make those comments. But since then, the tide has completely turned, particularly in relation to the 14 international experts. But you are absolutely right in relation to the families. Of course, this is distressing. When their babies died, they obviously lost a child, and it would have been tragic to them. Then they were told that somebody had murdered their children. Then they had to set through a trial. And then I came along and said, actually, I think this woman may be innocent. Of course they're going to be angry. Of course they're going to be upset. But my job as a barrister, as her barrister, is to represent her without fear or favour. And that's what I'm doing. And all I'm trying to do is get to the truth. These international experts, the best in the world, by far outclass the experts that were called at the trial, are saying no crime was committed here. And it doesn't matter. We talk about Facebook searches, or we can talk about how she came across in the witness box. All of that is totally irrelevant, because all of this came down to a medical hypothetical theory that has now been demolished by the international experts.
That's Mark McDonald, who is the lawyer for Lucy Letby. Thank you for joining us. Interested to get your thoughts on that.